Hi Cindy, I'm here with my dad. He's got multiple experience working with the correctional facility, more specifically with juveniles. He's worked at George Jr., the McCormick Correction Facility, and now the Finger Lakes Residential Center, which also houses juveniles. Um, from the historical standpoint, the development of juvenile courts in the United States started in the 19th and 20th centuries, aimed at rehabilitating rather than pushing or punishing young offenders. More of this was marked with the Supreme Court cases such as Thompson versus Oklahoma and Graham versus Florida. They discussed at addressing the unconstitutionally severe penalties like the death sentence and life without parole for juveniles. They emphasized lower responsibility and potential reform. Ways that the juvenile system and the correctional facility system they adapted to this was the four pillars of the procedural justice that I read in one of my articles. It's based on respect, fairness, trust, and their voice in the correction facility. More juvenile correction officers and how they go into depth in talking about how the youth are intelligent, resilient, and adaptable. But they also listed concerns of negative influence from external environments like home. Can you tell us about how you've seen this in the workplace, about how children's home life can affect how they act inside the facilities?
I mean, well, everything starts at home, right? Again, we're talking, you mentioned corrections. It's really not it's not really the Department of Corrections. It's more of a family court system. And again, the goal of the family court system is to keep families together if they can. But yeah, I mean, you see a lot of these kids with very sad home life stories, abusive situations, a lot of neglect. I mean, basically, any bad thing you can think of, these kids have seen it. I mean, you rarely find a kid who's had just sort of this perfect home life in this environment. These kids are given multiple chances, and so if they get to us, it's you can bet that they've been in some trouble. And again, they're lacking the support, the stability from their home life. So it's 100%. They're a creature of their environment. I mean, it's just the way it is.
Would you say there's any correlation to how worse it gets from their home life, because George Jr. is more like a first strike, second strike, rather than getting all the way to the residential center in Lansing where you work now? Would you say that their home life's worse where you work now rather than George Jr.?
Again, I without getting off on a tangent, there's a lot of levels to this, right? So if you look at a place like a William George Agency, or historically it was called George Jr., a lot of those kids are placed through a PIN situation, which is a person in need of supervision, adjudicated possibly a juvenile delinquent. Again, there's levels to this, right? You got a kid who's maybe just a status offense, where he's just not listening to his parents or things of that nature, whereas kids who've actually committed misdemeanors, which we would classify as a juvenile delinquent, all the way up to kids who've committed felonies. Again, I don't know if you can really say one parent or one home life's worse than the other. I mean, I don't really know how you would gauge that per se, but I would say that any placement, it's very intrusive, it's very severe, it's very traumatic. And so to take a kid out of his home is a traumatic situation, for everybody. And again, in my experience, you can bet almost always that there's some form of neglect. So to be able to say a kid in McCormick Secure Center had a rougher home life than a kid at George Jr., I don't really know how you gauge that, but I think you kind of examine this through the scope that both kids have had a rough go of things, so to speak.
And it also states in one of the articles that correction officers have to get key themes: respect, trust, and fairness. And how do you think that kids would react to this, not having such a great home life?
What do you say? Trust? What were they?
Respect, trust, and fairness.
Respect, trust, and fairness. Okay, so again, we are not corrections officers. People who work with children are usually referred to youth support specialists. Again, because again, we're trying to separate family court from criminal court. We don't want these kids believing that they're really a criminal yet. Before and sadly enough, the inevitable happens. But yeah, you got to remember, it's really not a rehabilitative situation. It's more habilitative. You're here to teach these kids life skills. Things that are normal for us, sort of like an empathy or a sense of just secureness or having ability to be able to depend on something. These kids don't have that. So absolutely, you need to establish that trust. That, and again, the kids need to depend that you're going to be fair because you're their sole giver. These kids can't go home; they're locked, and it's very traumatic. So absolutely, that trust, that kid has to believe that you're not going to hurt them, that you're not going to abuse them. These kids have severe trust issues. To the point where they can't even count on a meal. So any adults in their life, they've grown not to trust. So absolutely, and building that trust is incredibly hard. It comes from that fairness you're talking about. It comes from that consistency and giving them something that they can rely on every single day. A fairness, a firmness, and a sense of consistency. Absolutely. And that's built on trust. It's not built on big muscles. It's not built on yelling and screaming. These kids have been yelled at and screamed at their whole life. What they haven't been is cared for and seeing somebody actually invested in their success. So absolutely. Trust is huge. It's everything.
And I think the growing theme with the 19th and 20th century and all the the court cases is that they're all trying to tie these kids back into so they can be a part of society and a functioning part of society, which is why one of the things they bring up and one of the things that practices today is education. And one of the articles that I read is that high quality education in the juvenile corrections is critical for helping incarcerated youth successful transition back into public schools and reducing repeat offenders. Can you touch base more on that?
So absolutely. So I think the word you're looking for there is recidivism, and recidivism is very high. In the corrections department and also in the family court. Again, to gauge that with a number would be difficult, but I think it's upwards of like 90% recidivism rate. So again, it's like a revolving door, unfortunately. But education, obviously is paramount, right? So we get these kids with us, we have a limited time with them, so we try to arm them with every possible tool they can have to be successful. So we offer things that kids in a typical high school might not get. For example, we have an automotive program, we have a building workshop program, we have building maintenance, we have a barbershop program, all things that maybe typical kids in a typical situation aren't offered. So they do get a lot of one-to-one attention, they get a lot of things, but then you also have to realize that these kids are disadvantaged. They come from rough homes, they come from not going to schools, they haven't they're in 10th grade with like a 4th grade reading level. So to bridge that gap to get them where they need to be, on top of dealing with the behavior issues, it's a tall task. But absolutely, education is paramount. It's important.
And you touched base on this earlier, that teachers play a pivotal role in creating a safe, trusting space and environment for the kids so they can learn and be a functional part of society when they get back out into the real world.
Right.
So how do you think teachers can go above and beyond of helping that healing process and transformational process of going back into society and being a functional part of society?
Well, again, if you're in that environment, you've chosen it, I think, because you have a genuine care for kids. Because our kids, our youth, are not easy to deal with. So again, back to what you originally asked, it's building that trust. It's building that, I'm here every single day. If you're going to act a certain way or be defiant, I'm still going to be here for you either way. Whereas these kids didn't have that sense of consistency. They were judged. Parents weren't around. If they did something wrong, they may have gotten beat. They may have gotten. The imagination could run wild. But again, it's that establishing that trust. It's if you're going to if you say you're going to do something, you really got to do it, especially in this environment, because again, these kids are used to being let down. So again, it's all about that trust you spoke about, and it's about that consistency. You have to have it.
And going back to the educational part, another spin-off of that is something that has been more of a focus lately, and they're trying to integrate more, is special education and fit the needs for those who can't really think for themselves per se. So would you say that understanding that their disabilities, going above and beyond for the youth, is critical for developing these kids who might not have and might have to depend on another person to be able to live in the real world? How would you guys set him up for success?
Well, again, that's we have a lot of ability to offer one-to-one assistance for kids who need that. Certain IEPs, individual education plans. These kids come in, they're assessed, their reading abilities assessed. So we develop an IEP to suit that kid. And again, it's very tough to bridge that gap, but we also offer independent living skills. We do daily groups on how to cope and how to start a conversation. Again, all stuff we take for granted. But again, like I'll mention again, these kids aren't being rehabilitated, they're being habilitated. So we're teaching them how to ask for something or how to have a difficult conversation. So we're teaching those living skills on a daily basis. So again, because we're expecting their home life to be less than desirable. So when they get out, they will have some of these skills, and unfortunately it doesn't always work out that way. Most times it doesn't, but we do try to offer those resources.
Among disabilities identified, emotional disturbance is one of the top that ranks in the juvenile detention or juvenile correction system, being prevalent among a lot of incarcerated youth. Can you just touch base a little bit on that?
As far as I guess I don't really understand. You mean like being like they're emotionally disturbed? I guess
how would you integrate them with other kids that might not be special needs per se?
Well, again, it goes back to that habilitation, right? It goes back to taking a kid who is emotionally damaged, and physically even damaged, and you're teaching him the basic skills to exist in a regular high school. Because again, they don't have that ability to walk up to somebody and say, "Hey, my name is such and such. How are you?" and shake hands. They don't understand that, And again, because they just weren't taught basic social skills that we take for granted. And you can't really understand the scope of that until you're immersed in it. And again, I think that's where some staff will miss the mark and get frustrated with a kid. But the reality of it is that kid was never armed with those basic skills that we take for granted. You know what I'm saying? Even kids hiding food, that's a big deal. They're not supposed to do that, but you look at, initially you're going to say, "Oh my God, you broke the rule, blah 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 blah." But if you look at the underlying issue there, why is this kid hiding food? Is he afraid he's not going to get another meal? Is he afraid that he can't depend on the adults around him? So again, to your point, to what you were asking, we are trying to give these kids this life skills in a sense that people can be good, and in the right environment you can depend on people. So we try the best we can to make it a seamless transition back into, say, a quote unquote normal environment.
In one of the articles that I read, it said that policy implications are one of the best in Kentucky for this certain situation. They said that they target interventions and policy adjustments to better and address the needs of the youth with disabilities. Can you touch base on some of the policies that you have in your facility in New York?
Well, again, each kid is assessed, their reading level, their math skills, and then they're given an IEP, and again, that's an individual education plan that's best going to suit their needs, so that that way they can progress as a student. So there are definitely policies and procedures in place to help these kids be as successful as they can be. It's offering these resources to them, and it 100%. It's the job of the education staff to put in place these IEPs so these kids can get through, basic math, basic reading, things of that nature. So yeah, it's absolutely a policy that these kids are assessed and that they're armed with one-to-ones. If they have a one-to-one, meaning a person's going to sit with them in class and help them write, help them read, help them through. So yeah, we offer all kinds of things like that, and it is per policy that these kids be given these resources.
Would you say that these resources, not only just to the kids with disabilities and IEPs, but with also kids that are just in there that are comprehensive, have that reading level up to par, would you say that all these methods that you use in your facility are generalizedly like successful?
I mean, again, we do our best, but at the end of the day, you can only give them so much, and then we, unfortunately, the criminal justice system, the family court system has a long way to go, because ultimately we're putting a kid back into an environment. And, unfortunately, as much reading and stuff as you give them, if they don't have the right support systems in place, unfortunately, we lose a lot of kids back to the system, even worse, into corrections, because again, it's like you alluded to at the beginning, it starts at home. So unfortunately, again, we take them out of their environment, we try to give them the tools to succeed, but unfortunately we put them right back in.
Do you think with the outcome of the court cases and the potential reform route is a better way than just locking these kids up in normal prison?
Well, here's the thing, you keep saying prison. It's really not a prison, I mean, it's more of a placement, and yes, there are some, they are restricted, and there are locked in times, but again, there's a lot of great policies in place to make it so these kids are not locked down. There's a lot of accountability there, so these kids, I mean, obviously they are locked up. They're here against their will, obviously, but to say it's like an actual prison, it's really not. It's different in that sense, because again, we're there to habilitate, we're there to talk to these kids through the situation. So again, it's really not a jail. It's not a jail setting, but I don't really see a better way, because again, these kids, they're either hard to place. They've been in foster care since they were yay high. Unfortunately, they've been defiant. They've committed crimes, sometimes very severe crimes. So, what do you do with these kids? You have to put them somewhere. So, that's where we come in, and again, we do the best we can. But it is hard. It's very hard. I don't, as far as a better way, I don't know if there's a better way or a best way. But, I think, again, family courts have come a long way. I think juvenile justice has come a long way at putting the kid first, not treating it as punitive. Again, I think it's very important to understand that the family court system is not punitive. It's habilitative. So that's what we try to do to the best we can, the best of our ability.
All right, perfect. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks for having me.